Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate you participating in the process this evening. I want to make a couple quick introductions. With us this evening is our mayor, Rick Steinmeier. Council member District 4, Chris Corey is here. We also have a member of our zoning board in the back, Mr. Ben Hershenson. I just want to go over a little logistics for this evening. Council is here to observe and hear your input and be a part of the process, but they will be reserving their comments for when they are seated as city council, as this is a voting matter for them in the future. So they're here to hear from you all tonight, so we appreciate you being here. We are live streaming currently right now, and we will replay this workshop for others to see back in the future. With me this evening is Dr. Bob Lee from Florida Gulf Coast University, and he's going to give you a little introduction on himself and his background. And also with us this evening is our consultant for the redistricting process is Kurt Spitzer. He's right here on via Zoom. So what we'd like to do this evening is I'm going to hand this over to Bob. He's going to go over some instructions for this evening and how we're going to move forward with the process. We are working on making sure that there is a sign-in sheet on the back, which you can provide your email address as well to us for additional information. We have a web page up currently right now on the city's website that is dedicated to the redistricting process. And also you can email us at Bonita Redistricting 2022 at cityofbonitasprings.org. And all of those comments will be able to continue to come in through the entire process. We will forward those as part of the entire record for City Council's review during the process. And they're also part of the final public record of the redistricting process. We also on that webpage have some links to the state redistricting process too, quick links, so you can follow that along. That has no effect on the redistricting of the city districts here. So that's a completely separate process. And I think with that, I will turn this over to Dr. Lee. So he's going to give you a brief introduction. He will then allow Kurt to introduce himself. And Kurt has a PowerPoint presentation to go through to explain the process and the criteria. We are following all of the required state criteria as well in a resolution that was passed by City Council. The one addition that Council decided to take into consideration was to account for future population growth. So that is something that we'll be working with the community development staff on to look at permits that are in place that would be residential units that would create population within the 10 years of the next census. And that's what they would be looking at for consideration. So with that, I'm going to give this over to Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Arlene. Very good introduction, by the way. Good overview. Saves me a lot of comments. For those who don't know me, and probably none of you do, my name is Bob Lee, and I'm the Master of Public Administration Program Coordinator at Florida Gulf Coast University, where I'm also a professor there, teaching public budgeting, public finance, strategic planning, administrative ethics, nonprofit management, and a number of other courses in the program. Career-wise, before I got into academia, I had a 26-year career as a city manager in 4 different jurisdictions. I retired 15 years ago from that profession. My last stint was in Naples, Florida. So I retired in 2007 in Naples as their city manager. Since that time, I've done a lot of consulting work with municipalities and county governments here in Florida. And I have the honor today of just being a facilitator. And my role today is to enable you all to submit comments and questions that you may have on what's being presented by the consultant, Mr. Spitzer, who I'm going to be introducing here in just a moment. I would like to acknowledge the elected officials who are here and to thank you, particularly the citizens who have given your time to come out. Whether you intend to speak or not, the fact that you're here is much appreciated, and I think very, very important part of this process. I won't get into the details. I'll leave that up to Kurt, our consultant, in terms of criteria and maybe the evolution of this process. But but I will be jumping in when we start having some questions. By the way, given the number of people we have here this evening, we're going to keep this very informal. For those who are old enough to remember the Phil Donahue show, Arlene is going to be working with me, and we're going to be bringing the mic to you so you can ask your questions or make your comments. But I encourage you, if you have any questions on the nomenclature that is being presented this evening, to please ask those questions, and Kurt will be able to explain those terms to you, and then we can, of course, get into any of your comments. Finally, as you mentioned, Arlene, we may have some comments or questions that come in online, and I will be asking the city attorney when those come in to refer those to me, and we'll make sure that we get those addressed to Kurt, our consultant, as well. 2022, you can have your consultant virtual, you can have facilitator face-to-face, and you can have your important citizens doing both face-to-face and virtual. So with those probably too long stated comments, Kurt, I want to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and the program that you have this evening.
Bob, I hope you all can hear me adequately. Bob, I want to watch you trot around the room just like Phil Donahue did on his show when questions come up. My name's Kurt Spitzer. I'm the consultant that's been retained by the city to help with the redistricting process. And a little bit about my background. We've had our consulting firm since 1989. And prior to that time, for 10 years, I worked for the Florida Association of Counties. And the consulting firm has a local government thread that runs through everything that we do. In terms of redistricting, we have been engaged in 25 or 30 redistricting projects with local governments in Florida over the past 20 years, and they range in size from the city of Quincy, which is just north of me. I'm in Tallahassee. Quincy is about 7,500 people, to Pinellas County in the Tampa Bay area, which is around 1 million people, and a lot of different things in between. So we've had a good experiences at the local level. I know the city manager mentioned the state redistricting process. I think when people think of redistricting, they tend to compare it to what might occur at different state levels and different state governments. My experience with the redistricting process in local governments, with one or two exceptions, but my experience generally is that it's a very smooth, straightforward process. And as the advisors to the city, we try to keep it that way. We try to follow the generally accepted criteria and use sound data. And so we try to run it by the book, so to speak. So speaking of criteria, this evening we're going to talk about three things. One is criteria and the redistricting process. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the 2020 census. And then we will discuss some of the draft alternative plans that I have prepared for the city's consideration. And in an earlier shot of your meeting room area, I see where some of them are on display there. So, and then after that, I'll jump off the PowerPoint and jump into the software that we have, which might help answer any questions or help address any suggestions that you might have. But this little presentation will take about 15 or 20 minutes this evening. So redistricting is the process by which the legislative body equalizes differences in the population of the districts by making adjustments to district boundaries. The legislative body could be the Florida legislature as relates to its own districts, or those of the Florida congressional delegation, or it could be the county commission, or it could be a school board, or a city council, or city commission. The legislative body is the one that makes the determination of how the boundaries are changed. Redistricting is not reapportionment. Reapportionment is the process by which Congress reallocates the number of congressional seats within each state based on changes in population around the country. Florida, I believe, gained 1 congressional seat as the result of the 2020 census. I think the state of New York lost 1. That's reapportionment. That's not redistricting. Why do we do this? Well, the real reason we do it is because it furthers the principle of one person, one vote, which has its origins in the 14th and 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, equal protection and the right to vote, and also, and especially in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Counties have some statutory criteria that direct them as to when they must redistrict. There's less criteria in Florida statutes for cities, but it is required by the city charter or the city of Bonita Springs. So in terms of the guidelines, let's talk about these generally. Generally speaking, there are around 8 criteria that we follow. The dominant criteria is that districts should be almost equal in population, or as nearly equal in population as is possible. We avoid plans that dilute the voting strength of racial or language minorities. We follow census blocks. We follow significant boundaries. Districts should be compact. We should try to preserve communities of interest. And all of these things are things that make the district boundaries easier to understand for the electors and make it more likely that they will be able to vote for a candidate in an easy and understandable manner. Individual criteria and guidelines are balanced in concert with each other. It's impossible to develop a plan that attains all of the criteria at a level of 100%. It's just, you can't do that. And so we balance these criteria in concert with each other, with population being the dominant criteria. So let's talk about population. Absolute population equality between different districts. In the case of Bonita Springs, there are 6. It's essentially impossible to attain. What we try to do is to attain deviations from the mean, from the average or the ideal district size that are less than 3% over or under the average size. And even that sometimes is difficult to attain, but that's a good goal to try to achieve. Population is total numbers of people, according to the census. It's not registered voters. It's the total population. And when we have plans where 2 districts have a difference between a spread between the largest and the smallest district of greater than 10 percentage points, not 10%, but 10 percentage points, that raises a red flag in the courts, or may raise a red flag in the courts. In this example, this is Jefferson County, Florida, a few years ago, a small county near Tallahassee. Here, using their current plan with the new census data at that time, the largest district was almost 5.5% over the average, and the smallest district was almost 7.5% under. And so that was a deviation of almost 13 points. And the county commission in this case had to adjust the district boundaries to get some of these differences between the populations of the different districts more in line. We avoid plans which dilute minority voting strength. And there's two ways that redistricting plans can dilute minority voting strength, or I should say two most common ways. One is called packing and the other cracking. Packing is when you locate most of the minority population into one district so as to dilute the influence in other districts. Cracking is a little bit different. Cracking is splitting the minority population into two or more districts so as to dilute the influence in all districts. And so we'll look at a little example here in Sunshine City, Florida. Sunshine City has a population of, the minority population is 22.5%, majority is 77.5%. And under this plan that we're looking at now, this is a good, roughly balanced plan for this particular city. So let's remember where these populations exist. So here is an example of packing. Here, this district is drawn so that almost all of the minority population is located in just one district. In this other example, which is cracking, the minority population is now split amongst 4 different districts. So in either case, for the government as a whole, the influence of the minority population, the ability of them to elect a candidate of their choosing is diluted. We use census blocks. As we know, the Bureau of the Census counts the population of the United States every 10 years. That comes down to first states, then counties, then what are called census tracts, then block groups, and then blocks. And blocks, census blocks, are the smallest geographical unit within which population is made available to different units of state and local governments. And within census blocks, we have the total number of people, what their race and ethnicity might be, their age, and other information. This data is presumed to be correct. There are times when you might consider supplementing the census data with other sources of information, other sources of data, but that's usually done in the out years of the 10-year cycle, maybe year 6 or 8. If we know that there's been significant growth in one part of the city or the county, and we want to redistrict at that time, it might be wise to supplement the most recent decennial census data with other sources of information, but that's rarely done. And if you do consider that, you must document why you're doing it and how you're doing it. We follow significant boundaries. Districts, the new districting plan may follow existing district boundaries to the extent possible, and should follow major natural or man-made boundaries to the extent that they can. Water bodies, arterial roads, things like that. It's easier to understand for the voters. It's less disruptive to existing voter precincts. And with regard to natural or man-made boundaries, major boundaries, they're usually coterminous with census blocks. Not always, but in the great majority of time, usually. Other criteria, districts must be contiguous, right? We can't begin District 1 in one place, then hop over part of District 2 and continue District 1, a few miles away. Although you may attain contiguity by crossing a water body. We attempt to keep communities of interest together. For city governments, we try to not split neighborhoods or HOAs. For county and state government, we try to not split counties and cities. And we should avoid districts that have so-called bizarre shapes. We all are familiar with the term gerrymandering. This is the origin of gerrymandering. The ninth governor of Massachusetts, Elbridge Gerry, developed this particular plan. This is a cartoon from a newspaper back then. And someone said, well, that looks like a salamander. And of course, the comment back was, well, it's a gerrymander, not a salamander. But you can't develop plans that have bizarre shapes, and certainly you can't develop plans that have bizarre shapes without a valid underlying public policy. Here's a modern day example of a bizarre shape. This was 30 years or so ago in North Carolina, a congressional district. Hard to really see what that looks like here with the other districts on the map, but this is what it looked like. And the courts threw this out because it was a bizarre shape. Other special criteria can be found in your city charter. The city charter specifies the number of city council districts, roughly equal in permanent population. It goes on to say that beginning in the year 2001, and then after each decennial census thereafter, the city council may redivide the city into 6 districts as roughly equal in permanent population as is practical. And as was mentioned earlier already, the council did adopt a resolution specifying some of the criteria that it wanted to use to the extent that you can in the redistricting process in this year. So in summary, these are the general criteria that we try to follow. It's impossible for any plan to attain 100% compliance with all criteria. And frankly, it's very difficult for a plan to attain 100% compliance, even just with 1 or 2 of the criteria. So what we do is we balance all of these criteria along with each other and community preferences, with population being the dominant criteria. So speaking of population, let's talk just briefly about the 2020 census. We've done this now for hundreds of years in this country, and the 2020 census, actually organizational tasks began a year before the actual census did. Census Day is always April 1st every 10 years. So 2020, 2030, and so forth. And the data is presumed to be correct. This is the rough approximate plan timeline for the 2020 census. Actively began in January of 2020. Census Day was April 1st. Reapportionment counts, the population counts that are used by Congress to reallocate congressional seats amongst the states, that's due by the end of the year. So December 31st of 2020, reapportionment counts were due to Congress. And then 1 year after Census Day, March 31st of 2021, the counts were delivered to the states and local governments for redistricting, or I should say that they were scheduled to be delivered. Here's what really happened. COVID happened. The first case was in January of 2020. The census suspended field operations for a few months, and the reapportionment counts that were due December 31st were not released to Congress until April of 2021. And the counts to state and local governments, which were due March 31st of 2021, were not delivered until mid-August of last year. And even then, those were delivered in what's called a legacy format. It's final data, it's accurate data, but required some reformatting of the data before it could be used in a redistricting process. It was sort of like buying a desk at IKEA. You had to take it home and put the thing together yourself. So our charge with the city was to develop 3 maps. One was the map using the existing district boundaries with the 2020 population. And when you do that, you can tell if you really need to redistrict or not. Maybe you don't need to redistrict. And then 2 other alternative plans. We ended up developing 3 other alternative plans for this part of the exercise, and they're just draft plans. But looking at the first one, this is the existing district boundaries with using the 2020 census data. And remember the sort of the 10-point rule that we discussed earlier. If the difference between the smallest and the largest district was more than 10 points, that with some
Actually, the whole application just crashed. Why? Just stepping back on it. Second I step away, something goes bad.
That's it. There's the reason.
Let me see something. I think it's alright, is it?
Nah, we didn't touch anything.
Yeah. Here's okay.
Hold on, this. Oh, sorry, I thought you were.
Anybody wants to stand up and stretch or something? I mean, you've been listening to a nice presentation. You just got to providing the background, I think, which would help you understand the maps better and the decisions until they come back online.
This area here is a mangrove forest, a small mangrove forest. It's currently part of District 3. Nobody
Hi,
lives
Kurt.
there. But where this mangrove forest
Excuse me,
was,
Kurt.
got moved out of a block, a census block that was in District 3.
Hi, Kurt.
And got
Can you hear me?
moved into a block that mostly was in District 1.
Hi, Kurt.
Yes.
We lost internet for about 30 to 45 seconds.
Oh.
Sorry about that.
Start over with the alternative.
Also, we have a resident asking if you can do a full screen. So if you go to display settings and then do duplicate again. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Alrighty.
So where do you want me to start?
Probably about a minute back, if I had to guess.
Tell Addison to tell him to start this alternative over.
Yeah, I'd suggest you start the alternative over.
The alternative over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So we began with this part with the existing districts map. These are the current district boundaries, but with the 2020 census data. And so here we see where District 3 is underpopulated by about 16%, and District 6 is overpopulated almost by 25%. And so if you remember in the earlier part of the presentation that said that there's a general rule that districts that are where the disparity between the largest and the smallest district is more than 10 percentage points, that may raise a red flag with the courts. And so here we have a disparity of over 40 points. And so it's clear that these boundaries need to be changed so that the deviations from the mean can be made closer to 0, and if not 0, at least develop a plan where the spread between the largest and the smallest district is less than 10 percentage points. So the first attempt to do that is alternative 1. And the symbology here, the shaded areas, the purple or the mauve or this orangish color, these are all the existing district boundaries. The black lines show you where the new boundary is. And so District 4 had to shed a population. District 1 needed to gain population. So this area here, which currently is in District 4, is under this plan is moved into District 1. And in a similar fashion, District 3 grows over to I-75. It needed to add population. And there are other less significant changes in the plans here. But we come up with a plan that has a deviation of much less, under 10 points. I forget exactly what it is right now, but it's well under 10 points in this plan. This plan keeps the shapes of the boundaries pretty close to what they are now. And I don't know if you had gotten internet back when I was discussing this area over here. This little area here currently in District 3 is a mangrove forest. The Bureau of the Census from time to time may change the shape of census blocks. I don't know why that is done, to be honest with you, but they do that from time to time. This area which was in a census block that was in previously and currently is in District 3, this area got moved out of that block and moved into a block that is mostly in District 1. Nobody lives here in this mangrove area. And so to illustrate that this area is going to stay in District 3, unless there's some interest in not doing that, we manually redrew this part of this area so that this block stays in District 3. All of the population in this block, in the new block, was in the northern area here. So no one lives here. This just is a matter of keeping things consistent with where they are right now. The second alternative is a little bit different. It's actually quite a bit different than the first. The second alternative attempts to underpopulate District 6 to the extent that we can. And District 6 is the fastest growing area of the city. In this plan, we were able to underpopulate District 6 by 3%. Number one. Number two, this plan attempts to make the districts more compact. And so this area here, which is currently in District 4, is merged with this area here west of 41, currently in District 1. So District 4 would follow these boundaries here. Not too many different changes to District 3, 2, or 5. Obviously, there are significant changes to District 1. District 1 takes this area here from District 4, and that gets moved into District 1. And it also pulls up this part of District 6. So the districts are a little bit more compact, and District 6 is underpopulated by 3% under the average or ideal district size. The last plan is somewhat similar to Plan 2. It does not underpopulate District 6 to the same extent. And I might add, by the way, that the second alternative is, I will tell you, is slightly over the 10-point threshold. That can be remedied if there's interest in moving ahead with this plan. I'm sure there are ways to get underneath that 10-point threshold. Although I think you could make an argument that because of the city's desire to underpopulate District 6, that it was an acceptable reason to slightly exceed the 10-point rule in this case. But alternative 3 does stay under 10 points in terms of the disparity between the largest and the smallest district. However, District 6 is not nearly as underpopulated as it was in the second plan. So these are the three initial first drafts of the plans that we have now. This is a statistical information, a little bit greater detailed information than you see on the maps themselves. In alternative 1, the difference between the largest and the smallest district was just about 8.2 percentage points. For alternative 2, which underpopulated District 6, the disparity is about 10.5 percentage points. And for alternative 3, it's just under 9 percentage points. So, Bob, I'm happy to take questions now, or we can jump over to the software and take questions at that time once we're over there.
you say jump over to the software. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Is that part of your presentation or?
Sure, let me just do that now. So here you should be seeing this map that we have. This is a map of the city of Bonita Springs, and it's very similar to the paper maps that you have in front of you, and the symbology is the same. The reddish orange is District 1, District 4 is the purplish color, District 2, 5, 3, and 6. In alternative 1, these are the proposed boundaries. Alternative 2 is the alternative that tried to underpopulate District 6 to the greatest extent possible. And then alternative 3 does not underpopulate District 6 as much as the second alternative, but does try to make some of the districts a little bit more compact. So let me illustrate to you how this software works. These little lines that you see here now are census blocks, and sometimes they're the shape of a rectangle or a square, but a lot of times they're not. And in really densely populated older cities, Miami, Tampa, in the core of the city, there really is almost all of the blocks they follow city block shapes. But in newer areas, they don't. And so, but within each block, and let me just pick one at random here. This is a census block right here. This is block 3003. It has a total population of 1,338 people. 1,245 of them said that they are of one race. And I forgot to mention this to you. I'll follow back up on this point in a little while. But they said, I'm a single race person, either a single race, white, black, or some other single race. 1,131 identified themselves as being white, 12 black, 195 other. If you look at the maps that are on your poster boards there, and at the top column, you'll notice several different columns of statistical information. The first is population, the average population, which is simply the city of Bonita Springs 2020 population divided by 6. Then the actual population for each of the districts, and then deviations in terms of number and percent for each particular district. Then we have columns concerning race, and there are 2 each for 3 different racial categories: population and percent white, black, and other. When one fills out the census form, there are, I believe, 6 racial categories that you can choose from: white, black, Native American, Pacific Islander, and so forth. However, people may also say that I'm of two races or three or more. And so in the population white column, this reflects people who have said that I'm a single race white person. In the black column, these are people who have said I'm a single race black or African American person. In the other column, though, it's a combination. It could be people who said I'm a single race Native American or single race Pacific Islander, or it could be people who have said I'm of two or three or more racial backgrounds, and that's the other column. Hispanic is not a race. Hispanic is an ethnicity. So I might say that I'm a white Hispanic person or a black Hispanic person, but I'm still either white or black. And so if you add up the other black and white column, you get the total population for each of the districts and the city as a whole. But embedded in that are some people who have said, I'm of a Hispanic ethnicity. So excuse me for not mentioning that. So here where we see these tables, this is what one race means in this particular category. So here in this particular district, we had 1,338 people. 1,245 of them said, I'm of a single race. So you can see how this, for every block here, we can pull up this sort of information. And when we add lines, the software then will add up the total population and different racial categories for each of these particular districts. Any questions about that?
Well, Kurt, let me suggest, unless you think best otherwise in terms of your presentation, you've covered a lot of good detailed material. And maybe it would be a good opportunity at this time to take some questions to make sure people are clear on some of the terms that you're using and certainly the criteria. I think that was an important part of your presentation. So why don't we just open it up? This gentleman had his hand up.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
And if you would just, for the record, just state your name.
For the record, my name is Barbara Ogle. And looking at the redistricting maps, it looks like District 4 is going to be concentrated in basically two really large gated community areas. So as far as the city goes, it looks like it's going to be incorporated into Bonita Bay, Pelican Landing, and although it is a concentrated new district, it really doesn't seem to have a fair balance with what the city of Bonita Springs is. That's my comment.
Just Kurt, just for further clarification on the question, you say a balance of what the city is. Could you clarify that just a little bit so he can help?
Well, right now, District 4 encompasses areas outside of major gated communities.
Okay.
And it looks like the redistricting map, some of the alternatives, will incorporate the really two of the largest gated communities of our city. And the balance of power will be just, in my opinion, the balance of power will be shifted over to major gated communities.
For that district?
For that district.
Okay.
Because the city, those are the two largest gated communities in the entire city.
Okay.
So that's my comment.
Okay. Thank you.
So I assumed, just to talk about that a little bit, this would be either alternative 2, which does move this area here from District 1 into District 4, or alternative 3, which for the western part of the city does make the same adjustment. That's true. It does do that.
Thank you, Kurt.
And just state your name for us.
Ben Hershenson. I currently live in District 4, and just to, what Barbara just stated, it is precisely why I believe very strongly we have to reconfigure District 4. Right now, the balance of power exists, perhaps in one or two rather large communities. And for years, I've been trying to get ears to listen to putting together, I think, areas of the city that are a little bit more diverse. For example, I like some of the alternative plans. And what my specific recommendation is, and it's quite similar to some of the alternatives, is to essentially put the large gated communities together. For example, if somebody is running for an office, say, you don't get into a gated community unless you live in that gated community. To the east of 41, I see a lot of diversity. You have very small condos, you have small HOAs, gated, non-gated, but more importantly, in my opinion, you have people living in single freestanding homes. That, to me, has been an underrepresented area of the city, and it's time to do something about it. Because right now, I believe very strongly, contrary to the previous speaker, that the control is there anyway. And why not put them together, because they have a lifestyle that's somewhat similar. In the district I live in, or the area I live in of District 4, it's quite diversified, racially, socially, economically, et cetera. And to me, in order to bring about fairness, which I believe what redistricting is really all about, my hope would be that east of 41 makes sense. Whatever, I think it's either alternative plan 3, I'm not sure exactly, or 2 and 3 perhaps, the alternatives. I like that only because of the fact it recognizes an underrepresented population currently living in District 4, which really does not have a voice, because all it takes, and I'm going to say this, and no casting aspersions upon anybody currently on the council. I think they're all great people and they work very hard. And my district is no different. However, from the standpoint of reality, that basically that we've had this, a representative, a counselor from one community for the last, I don't know how many different elections. It's time to change that. All from one community, and it's gated. And I'm in a section of the city that doesn't have access to that population from the standpoint of walking around and getting to know people. So I like the alternative plans, and I realize that some people may not, but I think it makes more sense to me to give people who currently don't have a fair option to get back the potential of representation that they don't currently have.
Thank you. Gentleman had a hand back here, and then up front here.
Thanks. My name is
State your name, please.
Zachary Smith. I'm going to agree with the last gentleman. I think by consolidating the power, you actually weaken their strength. Having it spread across multiple districts just dilutes the voice of people outside those communities. So I agree wholeheartedly, and I do like some of the drafts. My question goes back to your last conversation. I know we're looking at future growth, and I know we're seeing a lot of future growth in District 6, but how does the diversity play into that? Is there any consideration for what the growth and that diversity of that growth will be in the future? I think when we look at District 6, you can see the draft plans have made District 6 whiter. And I think it's only going to continue that way because when we look at the growth that's happening in District 6, you look at home values, gated communities, things like that, it's not going to be our minority vote. So District 6, I think, is going to see a lot of growth in white, and the proposed plans are already showing that. It went from 90 to 93% white. So I was wondering what the thought process was for minorities and future growth and why we went from 90 to 93. It looks like both the plans are carving out the communities that would have that diversity.
Kurt, do you want to try to address that question?
Sure. There are competing criteria, right? And it's at first, let me say this, that it's it's when I first looked at these statistics, to be honest with you, and I saw that the Census Bureau said that there was less than 500 African Americans who lived in Bonita Springs. I thought that had to be wrong, but we did sort of confirm that. So all of the plans preserve the Hispanic majority and Hispanic influence districts in District 2 and in District 5. We have done that. In terms of race, though, it's difficult to try to find a way to create a minority influence district based on race when the fact is that the overwhelming population in the city of Bonita Springs is white. I mean, it's not like there's a 60-40 kind of a split here. It's mostly very significantly white. And so the objective of Plan 2 primarily was to underpopulate District 6 to the extent that we could, and then make the districts a little bit more compact while still leaving the District 2 and District 5, the Hispanic majority and Hispanic influence districts essentially intact. So that was done. But in terms of a regular racial majority district, I don't know if it could be done in the city of Bonita Springs.
Thank you, Kurt. This gentleman here.
Dwight Essman, and I live in the part of District 4 that might be broken off into District 1. The point I'd like to make is the least amount of change that you make in a district where you have an existing council person seems to be the most logical and fair way to do it. So the alternative one, I think, pulls a little bit of District 4 out and goes into District 1, which is going to have a new council person elected. But if you move Pelican Landing out of District 1 and put it in District 4, they will inherit a council person for the next 2 years that they did not elect. Maybe that's fine, maybe it's not. That's my opinion on the alternatives. My question is, it clearly stated that we need to be along precinct lines. And the question is, has Lee County drawn precinct lines or will they change?
Kurt, could you address that, please?
I saw that in the charter, and I think that's precinct lines change from time to time, and they change a lot after each redistricting exercise. And the precinct lines that exist today will not be the same precinct lines that are going to exist come November of this year. I think that is a sort of a Scrivener's error in the charter. I think we should draw these boundaries based on blocks, not based on precinct lines. Precinct lines, I can't find any. Well, we've never used software that's based on precinct lines. It's always based on census blocks. But you're right. I saw that language in the charter. It does say that.
What I'm going to suggest is, City Attorney is taking a look at charter right now, and I think valid question. Perhaps she may be able to give an update on her thoughts.
We're going to address everyone's questions with a posting on the website afterwards too, so the information's available.
So this is duly noted, though.
Yes,
we'll be forwarding that to Derek Rooney as well.
Okay. Well, the question I want to ask is, if I went to vote in my precinct, go, I mean, can they take my, if I'm in precinct 1 for, actually precinct 44, how are they gonna count that vote if I'm not, am I making sense?
Does
Can
that
you
make
try
sense?
repeating it again?
All right,
So-
right now I go to one polling place.
Right.
Right.
And I vote for everything on the ballot. The question is, if my district is in a different precinct, how do they know that I'm in a different district? I guess I'm not making sense. My point being, we
No.
gotta wait till they do the precincts.
One, you know, every county, many cities, and all of the legislative and congressional districts are in a state of flux now. And once those boundaries are all nailed down, then the supervisors of election around the state will have to redraw the precinct boundaries. That's when that will occur, and precinct boundaries, the precincts that you're in sometimes change from time to time anyway after redistricting. So that's how that will happen. It's not done in a vacuum within each city and county. It's done in coordination once it's done with the supervisor of election.
Kurt, I think because I think it is a very good question, and this is one that when you mentioned we'll be putting it on the website, this is one that we could get into some detail to address what your concern is. I'm sure others would have a similar question, so very good question. And any other comments or questions from anyone here face to face? Do we have any online that have come in? Any questions?
Nope.
This is a council vote, ultimately?
So to clarify so one can hear, the question was, this is a council vote. Yes, it's actually done by ordinance. So for the continuing steps, there'll be a public workshop. There'll be a presentation. There'll be a presentation at our March 2nd City Council meeting to the City Council. There'll be an opportunity for public comment at that workshop as well. And then ultimately there'll be an ordinance. There'll be the first reading of an ordinance and second reading of ordinance. The goal would be to address this by April. We do know that the requirements for submitting application to run for office is June. The deadlines are in June. So we wanted to have this process as far as long as so everyone would be able in a much advanced time to make any decisions they have. Oh,
Kirk, just again, Ben Hershenson. My question is this, and I think you covered this, but perhaps I'd like to have a reaffirmation or perhaps more detail. Can you explain the importance of, if it is a factor, the issue of diversity and perhaps issues of socio-economic background and so forth? Because again, the idea of the new District 1 comes across to me as really defining diversity with respect to the type of people and again, the backgrounds. And I'm just curious as to how important is that? Are these really criteria that mean something relative to the process that is dictated, by the feds?
Kurt, did you get that question?
I think I did. I think that what we have tried to do, and let me illustrate, let me put another layer on here. These areas here are, let me bump this up a little bit, are different HOAs, right, or neighborhoods. And what we have tried to do in this plan is to not split neighborhoods, HOAs, by district boundaries. And it's given the criteria and the configuration of the current districts in the city of Bonita Springs, and the location of major boundaries, natural boundaries or arterial roads, things like that. You have two Hispanic one Hispanic, a strong Hispanic influence district and one Hispanic majority district. All of these different factors make it difficult to make significant changes to the districting pattern. But trying to get to your point, what we tried to do is to keep major communities together in all of the plans. And so, you know, this is plan 2 here. The boundary goes like this. We did not split, I don't think, any particular HOA in any of the areas. And so that's what we tried to do. Now, whether or not this is, you know, achieves objectives, I believe the gentleman made mentions about communities of interest and things like that. Does that achieve it 100%? I think we try to do it to the extent that we could.
And I think the term diversity is a very, very broad term too, as we know. I mean, that.
You have HOAs communities and you have Hispanic communities, and I think Hispanic communities.
Let's get her on the microphone. Go ahead.
Sophie from here. I'm just confused because you speak about HOA being a community and Hispanic being a community. It's totally different. Hispanic can live wherever they want to live. They're not, you know, I'm very confused about that aspect.
Yeah, you want to clarify, Kurt, that
it's just that it's very confusing.
I think what may add some confusion is this term diversity. Diversity is very, very broad. I mean, that can be income, it could be people brought up, it could be the same race, same color, but they could be brought up differently, and they have diverse perspectives, diverse lifestyles. Diversity is very, very broad. I think for the purposes of what we're talking about here, Kurt, you were trying to take HOAs and not assuming that they're all of the same in terms of diversity, that they're all the same type of people. But it was just a way, as part of the criteria, to demarcate how you separated these districts by trying to keep those organized HOAs together. Is that correct?
Yeah. In other, Bonita Springs appears to be highly organized in terms of HOAs. In other areas, we sometimes struggle to get significant layers. They're called layers of information on just plain neighborhoods, because you try to not split neighborhoods. So that's what we try to do. Now, whether or not that is the best way, that is a traditional criteria used in the redistricting process. It's not at the same level, in my mind anyway, of population and race. We try to keep the districts, you know, pretty equal in population. We try to not dilute minority voting strength. But not splitting communities of interest is a criteria. Now, I'll say this too. There are some places that we've been in, Sarasota County, your neighbor to the north, where the county went recently from a system of at-large elections to single-member districts. And when we were redistricting those districts, we tried to not split cities. And the response from the county commission was, well, now that there's only going to be one person who's going to be elected from each district, wouldn't it be better to, in fact, split a city so that at least there'll be two people on the county commission that represents, you know, fill in the blank, the city of Venice or Northport or the city of Sarasota. And so they didn't feel strongly about that particular criteria, but we still focused the same level of focus on population and race in that county.
Kurt, I think I just want to add further clarification to this question, because I think if I heard your question properly, correctly, the idea of Hispanic assuming that they're a community of interest, I think is what gets confusing, because obviously Hispanics do not feel the same way about things. They're just like any other race. I think by using that term, community of interest, I think that's where, I know that's a term that's used in this process, but the reality is you're saying that it's a community where the population is of Hispanics, not that they have necessarily the same interest. And I think that's where you're coming from, correct? So just as for clarification, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying these are areas in this district where the population is largely Hispanic, and you didn't want to divide that in accordance to what the legal requirements dictate, that you're not supposed to be setting up these districts to divide minority populations, correct?
Right. The Voting Rights Act protects racial and language minorities, and so while, as we said earlier, the persons who are of Hispanic background can be of different races, they still are a protected group. And so in districts 2 and 5, you have either a strong influence district or actually a majority district. And so we would avoid drawing plans that would significantly move part of that population into some other district.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Okay. You have a question?
Yeah, so Zach again, and I actually live in District 2, but I'm going to bring up District 6 again. Just to make a point to Kurt, more of a comment, the areas you're looking at carving out are those northern boundaries, which are the older existing communities that are non-deed restricted, with the expectation that the south side of Bonita Beach Road, which is where all the new construction gated communities are coming in. So I think we're going completely opposite of the point you just made, where we're seem to be making a concerted effort to make District 6 more of a white affluent neighborhood and carving out those existing communities. So just a comment on that. But my question is, I guess, more about the charter. I'd have to look at election cycles, but if it's just a council vote, what are the checks and balances to make sure that votes aren't going in their best interest? If you know your district is being consolidated, you're going to vote to preserve your seat, knowing if you live in a certain community and that goes into a different. So what's the checks and balances to make sure that councilmen aren't voting to preserve their seat? Primarily if we're looking at major changes in District 1 and District 2.
I mean, I'll give Kurt an opportunity, but I'll be glad to jump in if you want to. Kurt, do you want to respond to that?
Bob, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I think that's more of a political question, and it's the reality is in every situation where the elected officials are going to be voting on redistricting, that is a consideration. There's an emotional component of all their decisions. I think the way that the safeguard, you mentioned check and balance, is that the law does require certain criteria must be applied. In this particular case, the City of Bonita Springs has hired a professional to do the best they can to apply that in what is unique, that is Bonita Springs, which is a unique situation which every other place has as well. And to have a forum like this so that you can see how the sausage is made, so to speak, in preparation for them. And then they just need to do, they're basically going to be selecting from these districts, and they can't alter from what those mandates require. But having said all that, the reality is there will be some elected officials in some communities, just like at the state and federal level, who will be looking at those districts, and the first thing that they're going to ask is, how does that affect me? Just like if you understand you're a supervisor and you're going into your CEO, and CEO says we're going to have some layoffs. The first thing the supervisor is going to say is to himself, how does that affect me? So it's just more of a human nature thing. I think it's a valid point, and it's one that the city council here needs to be conscious of when they're making that decision. Very good point. Any other comments? I really appreciate you keeping these concise, your comments and the questions. Have we gotten any other questions in from anyone? I think we're planning to go to about 7. Is that correct, Arlene? Do you have any final comments that you want to make?
No, only that Kurt will
Kurt?
be joining us virtually at our March 2nd meeting. That meeting's at 5:30 p.m. It will be a presentation on the City Council agenda. There will also be an opportunity for public comment during that meeting. Additionally, you can continue to send in comments to Benita Redistricting 2022 at citybenitasprings.org. That's a separate email address set up for these public comments specifically. Also, we have a page, again, dedicated on the website for redistricting as well. We will be putting up Kurt's PowerPoint presentation on that page of the website, and we should be able to get these maps up as well shortly after the meeting.
Thank you all for coming out and taking your time. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.